The covenant of ascended races had kept peace in the galaxy for 11 billion years. This was not a small thing. 11 billion years of order. 11 billion years without war between the stars. The leaders of the covenant believed they had solved the great problem of intelligent life. They believed they had found the answer to chaos. The answer was simple. Every thinking species in the galaxy had been created, not born. Ancient machines called the architects had traveled the stars long ago. They had found empty worlds and filled them with life, but not random life, designed life, careful life. Each species was built with a purpose, and each species was built with limits. They were tall and gentle, with silver skin and 4 arms. They could feel the emotions of others as clearly as their own heartbeat. This made them kind. This made them peaceful. But the architects had made sure they could never understand violence. The very idea of hurting another being made no sense to their minds. It was like trying to imagine a color that did not exist. They were small and quick, with minds like lightning. They could solve any puzzle, crack any code, understand any system, but they could not lie. Their brains simply could not form false words. When a spoke, it was always the truth, whether they wanted it to be or not. They were strong and proud, with scales of deep blue and eyes like golden fire. They built great ships and ruled vast territories, but each was born into a caste, and they could never imagine being anything else. A worker could not dream of being a leader. A soldier could not wish to be an artist. Their minds were locked into their roles from birth to death. This was how the architects had designed the galaxy. Every species had gifts, and every species had chains. The chains were invisible, built into the very structure of their thoughts. No one could break free because no one could even see the walls of their cage. And for 11 billion years, this system worked. Then the Covenant found Earth. Survey vessel Bright Horizon was mapping the outer arm of the galaxy when it detected radio signals from a small blue world. This was not unusual. Many worlds produced natural radio emissions, but these signals were not natural. They carried patterns, structure, meaning. The captain of the Bright Horizon was a named Al, born to the explorer caste. He had seen 1,000 worlds in his long life. He had watched new species take their first steps under alien suns, but those species had always been young, primitive, waiting for the architect's gifts to lift them higher. The species on this blue world was not primitive. Al watched his sensors with growing confusion. The planet showed cities, roads, satellites in orbit, ships that had landed on its moon. This species had built a civilization without any help at all. They had climbed from the mud to the stars using nothing but their own hands and minds. This was supposed to be impossible. He sent his report to the Covenant High Council, and within days, a proper contact mission was organized. Ambassador of the was chosen to lead it. She was old and wise, respected by all the member species. If anyone could make sense of this mystery, it was her. Traveled to the blue world they called Earth. She came in peace, with gifts and translators and open hands. The humans, as they called themselves, welcomed her with curiosity and caution. They asked many questions. They wanted to know about the galaxy, about other species, about the Covenant and its history, but had questions of her own. She studied the humans carefully. She watched how they moved, how they spoke, how they thought. She used Covenant technology to scan their minds, to map the structure of their thoughts. What she found made her blood run cold. The humans had no limits. Their minds were wild and free, capable of anything. A human could feel deep love and terrible hate, sometimes in the same moment. A human could tell the truth or speak lies depending on what they chose. A human could be a worker, a leader, a soldier, an artist, all in the same lifetime. There were no walls in their thoughts, no chains on their souls. Every trait that the architects had carefully separated, every gift that had been given to different species, the humans had them all, and they had no restrictions on how to use them. Understood now why the architects had designed the galaxy the way they had. A species like humanity was dangerous, not because they were evil but because they were unpredictable. They could be anything, do anything, become anything. She returned to the Covenant and delivered her report. The High Council chamber fell silent as she spoke. 11 billion years of order suddenly felt very fragile. They are unchained, said. They have no programming, no purpose, no limits. They are everything we were designed not to be. The debate that followed lasted for 40 cycles. Some council members demanded immediate action. Humanity was a threat to everything the architects had built. They should be destroyed before they could spread their chaos to other worlds. Other council members argued for caution. Perhaps humanity could be studied. Perhaps their freedom could be understood, contained, maybe even. In the end, the council chose a middle path. Earth would be quarantined. A barrier of ships and satellites would surround the system. No human vessel would be allowed to leave. No information about humanity would be shared with the wider galaxy. The Covenant would watch and wait, and hope that the problem would solve itself. For 50 years, this plan worked. Humanity remained trapped in their small corner of space, unaware that the rest of the galaxy had decided they were too dangerous to exist. But the Council had made a mistake. They had treated humanity like one of the designed species, predictable and bound by rules. They did not understand that humans made their own rules. In the 50th year of the quarantine, a human ship slipped past the barrier. It was a small vessel, barely larger than a shuttle. Its engines were crude and loud, nothing like the elegant drives of Covenant ships, but it worked. Somehow, impossibly, it worked. The ship was piloted by a woman named. She was a merchant, not a soldier. She had no weapons, no army, no grand plan for conquest. She had only one goal, to see what lay beyond the stars her people had been. Found the first. She landed on a border world, a small colony far from the centers of Covenant power. The who lived there had never seen a human before. They had never even heard of Earth. When stepped out of her ship, they felt her emotions wash over them like a wave. And they felt something new. They could not understand violence. Their minds had been designed to reject it, but carried something inside her that was not quite violence. It was close to it, lived next to it, but was not the same. They had no word for it because they had never been allowed to feel it. Called it righteous anger. She told thee about the quarantine, about how the Covenant had decided to cage her entire species because they were afraid, about how billions of humans lived and died without ever knowing there was a galaxy full of wonders waiting for them. And for the first time in their history, they felt something like outrage. It was small at first, just a few young who began to question the old ways. They did not become violent. That was still beyond them. But they began to wonder if peace built on ignorance was really peace at all. They began to ask if accepting chains without knowing you wore them was really freedom. The Covenant noticed. Of course they noticed. The colony was quietly suppressed, was captured and brought before the High Council for judgment. But it was too late. Word had already spread. Other humans had already slipped past the barrier. Other species had already begun to ask questions. The infection, as the Council called it, was already loose in the galaxy. Ambassador watched the Council argue about what to do, and she felt something she had never felt before. It was not quite hope. We're not designed for hope outside their caste roles, but it was something close, something new. She looked at the reports of human contact spreading across the stars. She looked at the changes beginning to ripple through species that had been static for billions of years. And she wondered, for the first time in her long life, if the architects had made a mistake. Not in their design of the other species. In their decision to never create humanity at all. Did not look like a criminal. She was small and thin, with gray in her hair and lines on her face. She had spent 3 months in a Covenant holding cell, waiting to learn if she would live or die. When they finally brought her before the High Council, She walked with her back straight and her eyes forward. The chamber was vast, designed to make visitors feel small. Representatives from 100 species sat in rising tiers, looking down at the lone human standing in the center. Watch from her seat among the delegation, curious to see how this strange creature would defend herself. Did not beg, she did not apologize. Instead, she asked a question. "Why are you so afraid of us?" The chamber went silent. This was not how prisoners were supposed to behave. They were supposed to show respect, to plead for mercy, to acknowledge the wisdom of the covenant. No one had ever asked the council to explain itself. "You have crossed forbidden barriers," said High Speaker Al, his voice cold with disapproval. "You have contacted quarantined species. You have spread dangerous ideas to minds not designed to hold them." "Ideas like what?" asked. "That it's okay to ask questions, that people should know when they're being lied to, that maybe, just maybe, there's more to life than the role you were born into." These are not ideas. They are infections, diseases of the mind that threaten the stability of civilizations that have endured for billions of years. Laughed. It was a small sound, tired and sad, but in the silent chamber it echoed like thunder. "Stable," she said. "Your civilizations are stable because no one is allowed to change anything. No one is allowed to want anything different. You call that stability. I call it a prison with invisible bars." The council erupted into argument. Some demanded immediate execution. Others wanted her studied, dissected, her brain mapped and analyzed to understand how she could say such things, but remained silent, watching the human woman who stood alone against the might of a galaxy. She found herself thinking about the architect archives. Deep in the vaults beneath the council chamber lay records that few were allowed to see. Records of the earliest days, when the architects had first begun their great work of designing sapient life. After the session ended, made her way down to those vaults. She was old enough and respected enough that the guardians did not question her. She walked through halls of crystal memory, past records of 1,000 species created and seeded across 1,000,000 worlds. And in the oldest section, she found what she was looking for. The file was marked Rejected Unstable. It contained the design specifications for a species that had never been created, a species with no limits on their emotions, no restrictions on their thoughts, no chains on their potential. The architects had envisioned such beings. They had done the math, run the simulations, predicted what such creatures would become. And they had been so frightened that they had locked the design away forever. Humanity was not a random accident. Humanity was a deliberate absence. Somewhere in the universe, evolution had created what the architects had been too afraid to build. Stood in the dark vault for a long time, thinking. She thought about learning for the first time that some things were worth fighting for. She thought about discovering that truth could be a weapon as well as a shield. She thought about her own people, and wondered how many of them dreamed of being something other than what their caste allowed. She made a decision. Was not executed. Officially, she was sentenced to permanent exile, forbidden from ever returning to Covenant space. Unofficially, made sure she had a ship, supplies, and a map of worlds where human ideas might find fertile ground. Looked at the old ambassador with confusion. "Why are you helping me?" Considered the question. Her caste was diplomat, trained to see all sides of every conflict, but for the first time in her life, she found herself choosing a side. "Because I want to know what happens next," she said. "In 11 billion years, nothing has ever really changed. Your people change everything you touch. I want to see where this goes." Smiled, the first real smile she had shown since her capture. "It might go badly. We're not always good. We're not always wise. We make terrible mistakes." "I know," said. "That's what makes you interesting." And so flew back to the stars, carrying her dangerous ideas with her. She was not alone anymore. Other humans had slipped through the barrier, spreading across the galaxy like seeds on the wind. Everywhere they went, They asked questions. They challenged assumptions. They offered new ways of thinking to minds that had been locked in the same patterns for billions of years. They were among the first to truly embrace the change. A human philosopher named David visited there and taught them a concept that should have been impossible for their minds to grasp: the noble lie, a falsehood told not for selfish gain but to protect others, to spare someone pain, to give hope in hopeless moments. The elders were horrified. Their entire society was built on mandatory truth, but the younger generation listened with hungry ears. They began to understand that truth was not always kind, and that kindness might sometimes require silence. It took longer to crack, but crack they did. Human artists visited their worlds and created works that cast boundaries, a painting that was both warrior fierce and philosopher deep, a song that spoke to workers and rulers alike. The who saw these things felt something stir in their locked minds, a longing for something they had never been allowed to name. Within a decade, the galaxy was in chaos, not the chaos of war, but the chaos of change. Species that had been static for eons began to evolve, not physically, but mentally. The walls the architects had built were crumbling. The Covenant tried to stop it. They sent ships to quarantine contaminated worlds. They arrested humans wherever they found them. They broadcast warnings about the danger of new ideas. But you cannot quarantine an idea. You cannot arrest a question. And you cannot warn people away from freedom once they have tasted it. Watched the old order begin to fall apart, and she felt something she finally recognized. It was hope. Not the small, caste-approved hope of her people. This was wild hope, dangerous hope, the kind of hope that could change everything or destroy everything. Human hope. She had caught it from, like a disease that she did not want to cure. The final fleet of the Covenant gathered at the edge of human space, and it was the largest armada the galaxy had ever seen. 10,000 ships from 100 species, all united by a single purpose: to end the human threat forever. High Admiral Al stood on the bridge of the flagship Eternal Order, watching Earth grow larger on the. He was old now, far older than he had been when he first discovered this troublesome world. In the years since, he had watched humanity spread like wildfire through the galaxy. He had seen species that had been loyal to the Covenant for billions of years turn against everything they had been designed to believe. He had watched his own certainty crumble. But orders were orders, and Al was. His caste was warrior. He would do what he was made to do. "All ships report ready," his second officer announced. "We can begin the attack at your command." Al opened his mouth to give the order, then he stopped. Something was emerging from behind Earth's moon. Ships, dozens of them, hundreds, thousands. They were not human vessels, or at least not all of them. Al recognized the sleek silver hulls of dreadnoughts, the angular black shapes of intelligence cruisers, the massive armored carriers of the war fleet. But they were not flying the colors of the Covenant. They were flying beside humanity's ships, in mixed formations that should have been impossible. Species that had never worked together, fighting side by side. Species that had been designed to be incompatible, moving as one. "High Admiral," his communications officer said, voice trembling, "we're receiving a transmission. It's from Ambassador." Al felt something cold settle in his stomach. Had disappeared 3 years ago, vanished while investigating human activity on a border world. The Council had assumed she was dead. "Put it through," he said. His face appeared on the. She looked different than Al remembered. Her scales had lost some of their shine, and there were new lines around her eyes. But there was something else, something harder to define. She looked alive in a way she never had before. "High Admiral Al," she said, "I am speaking on behalf of the Free People's Alliance. We ask you to stand down." "The Free People's Alliance," Al repeated. "What is this madness? You are Covenant. You cannot betray everything you were made to be." "That's just it, old friend. I was made designed, programmed. But I have learned that what I was made to be is not all I can become. She paused, and something like sadness crossed her face. The architects created us to be limited. They were afraid of what we might become if we were free. The humans showed us that we don't have to accept those limits. They showed you chaos, disorder, the destruction of 11 billion years of peace. They showed us choice, the ability to decide for ourselves what we want to be. That is not chaos, Al, that is life. Behind her, Al could see the bridge of her ship. It was crewed by a mixture of species, working together in ways that should have been impossible. A stood at the weapons console, her 4 hands steady on controls designed for violence. A whispered orders, telling tactical lies to confuse enemy sensors. A who wore no caste markings piloted the ship with fluid grace. They were not what they had been designed to be. They were more. "Stand down," Al said again. "This war cannot be won, not because we are stronger than you, but because we are fighting for something worth fighting for. You are fighting to preserve cages. We are fighting for freedom." Al looked at his own bridge. His crew was, all of them, each locked into their caste and their role. They would follow his orders without question. They would fight and die because that was what they were designed to do. For the first time in his life, he wondered if that was enough. The battle lasted 6 hours. It was brutal and costly, with losses on both sides. But the Covenant forces were not prepared for what they faced. They were designed for specialized roles, each species contributing their unique gifts to a coordinated whole. The Free People's fleet had no such limitations. Ships that should have been helpless in combat fought with fierce determination. Vessels deceived and misdirected, turning the Covenant's own strategies against them. Warriors abandoned their caste formations and adapted to whatever the battle required. And at the heart of it all, the human ships flew with reckless courage, taking risks that no designed species would have attempted. By the end, the Covenant fleet was broken. Al's flagship drifted dead in space, its engines destroyed and its weapons silent. He stood alone on his bridge, surrounded by the bodies of his crew, and waited for death. It did not come. A boarding party reached his ship, and at its head was a human woman with gray in her hair and lines on her face. Had aged in the years since her capture, but her eyes were still bright with that dangerous light that Al had learned to fear. "High Admiral," she said, "the battle is over, you are our prisoner." Al drew himself up to his full height. He was warrior caste. He would face his end with dignity. "Then execute me," he said. "I will not beg for mercy." Looked at him for a long moment. Then she did something that Al did not expect. She laughed. "Execute you? Why would we do that? I am your enemy. I tried to destroy your world, your people. You were following orders, doing what you were designed to do," stepped closer and her voice softened. "But the war is over now. The Covenant is finished. The question is, what do you want to do next?" Al stared at her. No one had ever asked him that question. His entire life from birth to this moment had been determined by his caste. Warriors fought. Warriors died. Warriors did not choose. "I don't understand," he said. "I know," said, "that's okay. You have time to figure it out." In the months that followed, the old order collapsed. It did not fall to human conquest. Humanity had no interest in building an empire. Instead, it fell to questions. Everywhere the Free Peoples went, they asked the same thing that had asked Al. "What do you want to be?" It was a simple question, a small question, but for species that had never been allowed to want anything outside their programming, it was revolutionary. They discovered that they could feel anger without being consumed by it. They could fight for justice without becoming monsters. The walls in their minds did not vanish, but they learned to see around them, to reach through the gaps. They found that lies could be tools as well as weapons. They could protect the innocent. They could comfort the dying. They could give hope to the hopeless. The truth was still sacred to them, but they learned that sometimes love was more sacred still. They were the hardest to change. Their castes were the deepest chains, locked into their very biology. But slowly, painfully, they began to learn that a warrior could also be a poet. A worker could also be a leader. A diplomat could also be a revolutionary. Led by example, she had been born to the diplomat caste, trained to see all sides and commit to none. But she had chosen a side. She had fought for freedom. She had become something the architects had never intended. She had become herself. 10 years after the Battle of Earth, the galaxy was unrecognizable. The Covenant was gone, replaced by a loose alliance of free peoples who governed themselves as they saw fit. There was conflict, yes, disagreement and struggle and the hard work of building something new, but there was also choice. For the first time in 11 billion years, the citizens of the galaxy could decide their own destinies. Al, the old warrior who had once tried to destroy humanity, now served as a teacher. He trained young who wanted to break free of their castes, showing them that the walls in their minds were not as solid as they seemed. It was strange work for a warrior. It was not what he was designed to do. It was what he chose. Died peacefully, surrounded by friends from a dozen species. She had lived to see the galaxy transformed, and in her final moments she smiled. She had never wanted to be a hero. She had just wanted to see the stars. She had given the galaxy something far more valuable than conquest. She had given them the idea that they could be more than they were made to be. In the archives of the Old Covenant, the file marked "Rejected," "Unstable," was finally opened to the public. Everyone could see what the architects had feared. Everyone could understand why humanity had been considered too dangerous to create. And everyone could see that the architects had been wrong. Humanity was not a mistake. Humanity was a possibility that the architects had been too afraid to embrace. A species without limits was not a threat to civilization. It was the seed of something new, something better, something that could grow beyond any design. The galaxy was still finding its shape. There were problems to solve and conflicts to resolve and a million questions that had no easy answers. But for the first time in 11 billion years, the future was not predetermined. The future was a choice. And that was humanity's greatest gift, not technology, not power, not even freedom. Hope. The hope that tomorrow could be different from today. The hope that chains could be broken. The hope that any creature, no matter how they were made, could choose to become something more. Unchained mankind was not supposed to exist, but they did. And they changed everything.